You are now listening to Conscientization 101, an online magazine combining reflection, music, and action through independent media.
It's very important to be with conscious African women and men. And I'm very excited to see Conscientization 101, to see Sister Zari there and the brother James, and to see that you have started an organization to conscientize the world, especially African people, about what's really going on in this world.
Conscientization 101.
A lot of these people right now in this conscious, so-called conscious movement, they're not actually living in that lifestyle.
Fakers.
That's why, obviously yourself, we're on the same sort of frequency. That's why you're listening to the same things I'm listening to, because we're sharing that same sort of thought. We want the same sort of things, and a lot of people don't want the same sort of things. Even yourself, what you're doing now is for the people. So everything is people-based.
Globally conscientizing.
What's making me proud of what this kind of connection here is that, no matter what is said, no matter what is done, you leave listening to our music with a feeling. The same way we're going to leave this conversation with a feeling. And that is the most important thing for I and I, the vibe and the energy and the feeling that you leave with, because you might not remember every lyric, but you're going to remember the feeling. So that's really important, and that's what I'm getting from what you're doing.
Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of the Conscientization 101 podcast. I am your host, Zari Sundiata, and I will be introducing you to part 2 of our 3-part series where we feature excerpts from a dialogue we had with Dr. Julian Kunnie of the University of Arizona about his book, The Cost of Globalization, Dangers to the Earth and Its People. And if you heard part 1, we know you thoroughly enjoyed it and you've been looking forward to part 2. It took place, the full interview took place over 2 days. It was December 12, 2015 and January 23rd, 2016. So that just gives you an idea of how thorough the conversation was. And the complete unabridged interviews of this 3-part series is over 4 hours long. So there you go. And we'll let you know how to get the complete series at the end of the show. So I'm going to stop talking and we're going to air part 2 of our interview with Julian Kunnie about his book, The Cost of Globalization, Dangers to the Earth and Its People.
Julian, you have a chapter called Globalization, Ecocide, and Lethal Threats. And it's an in-depth discussion and analysis about the effects of globalization on indigenous people, culture, and land bases. In the summary, this chapter provides more evidence and support about the overall argument that globalization equals colonization. One of the most insidious aspects we feel of exploitation is this new trend of ecotourism, whereby Westerners embark on excursions, to learn about the true culture of indigenous people. And they propose this as an economic development for developing, and I put developing in quotes, nations. And while they decimate the economies and gain all control over certain indigenous knowledge, they can delude themselves into believing that they are being benevolent by contributing to the tourism market, which is essentially an economy based solely on serving and affluent people from Western nations. I remember Chinwezu talked about this, and Ngugi talked about this. I remember in Petals of Blood, has also criticized this so-called ecotourism. We would like you to first give us your definition of indigenous people from your book and then talk about this dichotomy between the capitalist causing destruction and then presuming to give the solution to this destruction.
Yes. Thank you, brother. Indigenous peoples are peoples of the earth who are determined to retain, who insist on retaining their ancestral heritage, their language, cultures, and lands, and refuse to be assimilated into the so-called Western cultures, systems, and societies of genocide.
Yes.
So these are peoples. Now, we're all indigenous.
That's true.
We're all indigenous by virtue of being children of the earth. Even the Europeans, they come from this earth. They don't come, even though they like to think they come from outer space. They come from this earth. The problem, the issue is, and this is why we see so many problems spread by so-called European peoples. And I say this not in some type of antagonistic way. I say this in a matter-of-fact way, because it was pointed out by Malidoma Some in the book of Water and the Spirit. Malidoma Some is a Dagara traditional practitioner from Burkina Faso, from West Africa. And he said the reason why the Europeans are restless and the reason why they are violent, and I talk about the ruthlessness of colonialism, when they kidnap children and take them to boarding schools, which Malidoma went through, and he lost his language. And then they start perpetual wars among relatives, communities of people like Rwanda and Burundi, people who speak the same language fighting each other. So why is it that Europe has persisted in this perpetual, perennial, these endless wars, like the United States, wars without end, right? And it's because the Europeans have refused to recognize the spirituality of the earth and their own ancestors.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, when the Europeans came into this country, so-called migrants, but they were colonial invaders, occupiers, settler colonialists, they were told that they needed to give up their roots in Europe. Mm-hmm. So the Scandinavians that came, the Germans, the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Danes, the Finns who came to Minnesota, or Wisconsin, or Chicago, and so on, they were asked to give up their own languages and take on English. Mm-hmm. And if you speak to many of those old Europeans there in the Midwest, they'll tell you that. They've told me that. So this was the part of their rejection of their ancestors. Now, when you reject your ancestors, you have no roots.
Yes.
And if you have no roots, you become ruthless. You have no conscience. Mm-hmm. So the reason why the Europeans are perpetually violent and destructive, there's no other place on the face of this earth where you've seen so many wars and destruction as in so-called Europe. France, Germany, Scandinavia, Finland, Britain, Scotland, and all these places, right? Portugal, Spain. So, and that's because they have refused to recognize their ancestors and what their ancestors have done in history against the earth and against the indigenous peoples of the earth and against the ecology. Darwin was going out into the Pacific and studying, all these different plants. And then he goes out and says, origin of species, the fight for existence. We all, have to fight. The strongest will survive.
Right.
And that's why the Europeans are destined to become the rulers of the world, because the quote inferior savage races just aren't strong enough to survive in this world. Darwin, the father of genetics and evolution and all this kind of thing, all male anyway. So when we talk about indigenous people who refuse in any way to recognize the legitimacy of colonialism and genocide as the basis of existence, but who insist on continuing to practice their languages, their traditions, their cultures, raising their children in traditional ways, and who continue to practice their ceremonies on their ancestral lands, who continue to venerate their sacred sites, right, where they do ceremonies and get strength and comfort and empowerment from those lands of their ancestors that their ancestors have received from the earth, from the spirit world, like the Maasai in Kenya, in East Africa, for example. These are the peoples who continue to protect the earth and their ancestors from the earth. And this is why, and now, of course, we find that this is where most of those resources, the gold, the diamonds, the platinum, the vanadium, the zinc, the cotton, the sugar, all of these vital minerals, food, are found in these indigenous lands. Uranium, Niger, copper in Arizona, in Papua New Guinea. I mean, you're looking at gold and all of these found in these vital indigenous areas. And so this is why you have ecotourism.
Yes.
Right? You got the Europeans then sending their messengers, like they send the missionaries, right? The missionaries, the so-called explorers who were the invaders, Columbus and Cortez and Vasco da Gama, that we all had to celebrate as heroes.
Heroes, yes.
The world. So, yeah, it's just, you look back and say, man, how I was a kid, I had to answer the history exam and put down
right
who the explorers were in, 1450 and 1492 and everything else. So today, ecotourism is the business, and it's a business.
That's right.
This is the thing about European capitalism. Everything is for money.
Yep.
The light of the sun, solar energy, $20,000 to put solar panels on the house where we live. Okay, you have to pay for water. You have to pay for land.
Yes, you pay for water and land.
And
yes.
food.
You have to pay for land. Now, indigenous people said, this is why the Maasai, they have it very clear. Maasai, they said, look, we are indigenous peoples. And for us, there's like three principles. We as human beings, we're meant to be free and happy. To be free and to be happy. Right? Not put in a cage, not put in a reservation, a reserve, a ghetto, a slum. We're meant to be free as human beings, like the rest of the natural world. The second principle is just as important. The earth can never be owned. The earth can never be owned.
Right.
And the Maasai say, we can't compromise on those two principles. That's why all these brothers and sisters being put in prison, and they're finding they have some type of game park out there in Maasai country in East Africa. And, they're giving the Maasai hell, the Kenyan government, the Tanzanian government, forcing those people out of their traditional lands so that they can have tourists, Serengeti, have all these tourists come in. And all of those parks, by the way, were based on the model from 1872 of, quote, American, United States colonialism, European colonialism of the United States. They forced out indigenous peoples out of Yosemite, 1872, and started what they called national parks. How about that? To protect nature. To protect nature. So that we can all go out, camp out at Yosemite, Yellowstone, Rocky Mountain Park, to enjoy the quietness of nature, of course, without the indigenous people.
Exactly.
Minus the indigenous people. And so Brazil has that in the Amazon. East Africans have it with the taken over Maasai lands. In South Africa, they have the Kruger Park and all this kind of thing. All of
Kruger
these,
Park.
yeah, Kruger after Paul Kruger, the
Yeah,
guy
that's
who was
exactly-
supposedly the Kruger, the Kruger coin.
Yes, exactly.
Kruger, yeah.
That's why I said.
Yeah, then in Nepal they got Mount Everest National Park, but in all of these practices, you go out. I've been out actually in South America, in Peru, Machu Picchu.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful historic Aztec Inca site out there, and way up in the mountains, way up there, and that's where the Spanish went and killed the indigenous people for gold.
Right.
Massacred indigenous people. Well, now they turn it into a tourist site.
Yeah.
So you make money from the historical heritage places of indigenous people. Then you have what is called eco-tourists, so that the white people, the Europeans, are principally the tourists, and they may include some Japanese and so on, and who can come in there and give money to, quote, the natives, in the name of ecotourism, so that all these Europeans can feel good about themselves.
Self-serving.
Yeah, still serving. So it's the same system, and it's all colonialism.
Yep.
It's eco-colonialism. And we must speak the truth about this. It's just, when I was in Michigan, in Kalamazoo, we were talking about it. I said, you can't have study abroad programs which study Africans like people are in the zoo.
Very anthropological.
Exoticize the African people.
Yeah.
You can't have study abroad programs. You got all these white people out there, right? White students go into Africa, and sometimes they may even, white women may find a wonderful black man for a husband, which happen in these cases, And
underage youth, I heard.
Yeah. So you have them, then they take these photographs, and this white woman is centered, a white man is seated
in the middle,
kneeling down in the middle with all these black children around.
Yep.
And they send this home, they send this to the college, they put that in the study abroad brochure. And I said,
oh my God, I hate those pictures.
Yes, I said, these are the
so condescending
colonial programs. Eurocentered programs. So the college and so on there, Western Michigan, they got very upset with me, and I had problems with the provost and the dean, the president, and everything else. And I said, look, you have to have authentic study abroad programs where Africans are not seen as some type of, people in the zoo, exotic beings, where, these white people go down and they're the heroes and the heroines.
Yes.
This is not about white people. This is about Africa. You go to study Africa on Africa's terms.
Yes.
And you keep your mouth shut and you listen, because you don't understand and you don't know the language and the nuances and the clan languages and the culture. Expert. So you be humble. I told them that. Of course, they didn't like me when I said that. But, we have to tell the truth that these ecotourism programs benefit. Like I mentioned in my book, that, the 6 million that was made out of Nepal from the tourists at Mount Everest Park,
yes,
all of them went to the tourist companies in the West. Same with Machu Picchu, the same with Uluru in Australia. At the Anangu people receive 1/4 of all visitor receipts, and we actually went there. We were out there in Uluru, the sacred central locus point of Australia, that rock that's about 8 to 9 miles, round, sacred ancestral site. And these guys, they try to bribe the indigenous people there. We're giving you a portion of the money, and you can be the manager, and you can be the gatekeeper, and all this kind of thing. People say we want the land back.
Yeah,
we want our ancestral lands back. So too with Masai Mara in Kenya, the same kind of thing. From British occupation to the Kenyan government occupying traditional Maasai lands at Masai Mara. And that's how we have a project with a brother, Samuel Nakaida, called the Inyakwere Cultural Restoration and Ecological Preservation Project. Because the impact of global warming and climate change has devastated, all these traditional Maasai ancestral lands. So we're dealing with a lot of issues there. And we don't need ecotourism to reinforce the economic exploitation of indigenous cultures. So, this is about self-determination. This is about decolonization and Africans regaining and reclaiming our right to manage our own ancestral lands and honor our ancestor obligations. This is not about the white people coming to help us, feed ourselves, or the Peace Corps coming to build some water fountain.
And spy on us.
Give us water.
And spy on us.
And, of course. Peace Corps is basically a conduit to, that's how Kennedy started it, because he wanted to say, he said, we're tired of this ugly American, slogan. So here we got the Peace Corps, and you got a whole bunch of people, even some black people who joined the Peace Corps.
Oh, yeah.
I want to go to Guinea. I want to go to Cote d'Ivoire. I want to go to Mali. And I said, why? Well, we're going to help Africans build some houses.
You ain't build no houses over here, and you going to help Africans like you special. And the thing about it is, all you got to do is read Kwame Nkrumah's Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. And it's at the end where he talks about the formation of the Peace Corps with Kennedy and the Schlesingers and all them. He talks about what it was supposed to be like. And what is that American thing in Africa? It's like a news agency. I forgot what it's called. I remember.
Oh, yeah.
It's called
Marcia Coleman out of bio says something.
Yeah, she said something. It's called something Airways, something Africa. It was started.
You're talking about Voice of America?
Voice of America.
That's
what
it.
it is. Yeah.
The Voice of America, which is propaganda.
Oh, yeah. It's a propaganda machine. They've had that from the 60s.
Yes, exactly.
60s. Voice of America.
The Voice of America. And that's what Africans hear about us on a daily. And then
like
we said,
Fox News.
Right.
What's going on in our lives?
Yeah.
While we all Beyonce.
The real truth. Straight talk.
Straight talk. We ain't even got no own nothing, but some kind of way we the Voice of America.
Yeah, it's just, it's all craziness. And that's why we don't need eco-tourists. We need our people. If we have tourists coming in, you come in and we control the resources of the country, and we protect the ecology of the country. And, we need our lands back before we need tourists. Okay. We have to have mutual respect. It's not about imperialism coming in like colonial predators and missionaries, and tell us about your culture. Can you do a dance for us?
Oh my God. They do that stuff on the college campus.
Yeah, they do that over here.
Can you say some words in your language, please, so I can record it? This kind of exotic nonsense.
Yeah.
This kind of exotic nonsense. They used to do the same thing here. With these study programs where they go into the south side of Chicago.
Yeah, they do the same thing here.
Yeah, this is how black people live,
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. So it's just, it's all this racism and paternalism, like the pathology is with us. The white people need to study white people.
They sure do.
They need to study their societies to understand their histories and their dysfunction that made them so abnormal in the world.
Yeah, they don't know their own history.
The cultures of extraction, the cultures of predation, the cultures of ecological extinction, it comes from Europe. It comes from them, from the peoples of Europe. So, and this is, again, I'm not European bashing here. I'm just saying things as a matter of fact so that we recognize the problem and correct it.
Right.
And my European relatives have a right and an obligation to correct it so that we can all breathe in this world. This is not about anti-Europe and all this kind of anti-white and what have you. This is about us telling the truth of how these things began and how they persist today. This colonial system has never been abolished. It's never abdicated, and it needs to be destroyed. Globalization is a colonial system. Imperialism is a Western European system.
It is always a relief to come home. And as I get older, I seem to be more and more preoccupied with the spirit that is Africa. Africa is not just the people. Africa is not just a state of mind, although it is all those things. Africa is our animating spirit, and is indeed the animating spirit of the world.
Out came the Twa, out of the mist. Before Rome or Persia exists, before Ming, before Greece. Circle the planets, all of the seas. First with speech, astrology. New stars that the rest couldn't see without a telescope. Past the Dogon about Sirius being so on. Pyramids aligned with Orion's belt. Lies that they tell about my kind melts. Literally built heaven on earth. Put women first cause they gave birth. Wrote on the wall, still there today. High science, high culture displayed. First to give divine Lord called my up. Written down before Genesis starts. Olmecs left out of the west, landed in the south, you all know the rest is set and the Sa. Can't forget Uhuru, which means hero that's inside you. Him and him too, divided by tribes. Together is the way we survive. Krishna is black, Buddha's nappy head, they all hate the fact. First to appear, walk with a G, trace verbally. The ancestors live inside you and me. Nah, never left inside ourselves. Love for ourselves made us rebel. Caribbean Sea, where the place we fight to survive like Haiti. First to give divine law, called my up, written down before Genesis starts. Anthropologists in black consciousness speak to my kind through rap politics. Held up our fists through the anguish. Genocide for my kind still exists. They don't want you to wake up, cause when you do their plan shake up. It starts with the child, teach them the way. Humble and wild for the freight. Build for the day and the next Timbuktu. In the flesh left in Brazil, West Indies. Yet still we build our way to be free. Puerto Rico means rich pork. Got caught in their blood sport. First to give divine law, called my up, written down before Genesis starts.
Africa.
Even the continents were born from Africa. Humanity, of course, itself was a child of Africa. What we call civilization is just one of Africa's latest products. And I think that our collective task is the rebuilding of that civilization. Absolutely, because you see, that is where it begins and ends for all of us. That indeed, to the extent that people of African descent have a major problem, it is indeed a spiritual problem. And until that spiritual problem is taken care of, anything else we do is futile. Now, one of the consequences, you might say, of my first, but by no means last, sojourn here was that we began to discuss, in some sense, the other dimensions that engulf of the universe. What we call modern physics only recognizes 4 dimensions: length, width, height, and time. But modern physics is now coming up against a brick wall of their own making, because they are finding that to get beyond those 4 dimensions, and by the way, those 4 dimensions are limited by the physical constant we know as light speed, but to get beyond them, there is only one way to go, and that is through consciousness, because the 5th dimension is consciousness or mind. And that with consciousness or mind, you encompass all the other 4 dimensions, and you transcend light speed. And it is therefore possible, really, as African adepts have known for time immemorial and have practiced for time immemorial, to in fact be 2 places at once. To indeed to see eternity in a second and the universe in a grain of sand through the medium of the mind, through the medium of the conscious, literally to go to the farthest ends of the universe. And there are those who do that, who encompass the universe, because if the universe is in fact mind, it is accessible to mind. And we find in ancient Kemet that what? The universe comes into being through the agency of the mind of the creator, who gives the creative word out of that mind, and his name is Jehudi or Thoth. The Dogon say that the universe is a thought in the mind of Amma, the creator. So we see that even in the profoundest of African philosophies, this idea that the universe is mind is at the very heart of their thinking. So Modern physics is a latecomer to an essential truth that African adepts and sages have known from the beginning of humanity itself. And the word is there for anybody to see, read, hear, and understand.
Yes, and I want to say this to anybody listening to the audience. There's a book that everybody should read, whether you are European, African, indigenous, Asian, whatever. There's a book. And this will help. This is, if you got your little white friends, hey, this is a book that will help them out. It's by a white guy. I read this book every year. And those of you might ask yourself the role white people might play in the revolution. It's called The Colonizer and the Colonized by Albert Memmi. That is a book. They talk about y'all in there. Are you left-wing colonizers? And and the thing about it is, the liberation struggle that brings the colonized together into a self-determining body. Guess what? We can't make sure you get your privilege. Guess what? If we come into a new humanity,
yes,
you ain't no European. You're going to have to ask yourselves, who am I? Yep. Because for 500 years, who you've been is in counter-distinction to someone else. The white path has killed us, not the dark path. It is darkness which preserves. When you go to the root, when you go get a plant, you have to place it in the soil. It nurtures itself in darkness. The reason why we can go out in the sun is because we have that melanin, that darkness, and it develops us. And that's the whole point. Y'all don't have that, okay? Now, all I'm saying is this. You're going to have to ask yourself who you are. I know it's hard coming out of an icebox, but your whole culture has been propagated on paternalistic, stealing from the one hand, and then being paternalistic. And then even when you try to struggle, you still want to place yourself as the leadership. And then you ask yourself, when you in these formats, what role do I have in it? We trying to make ourselves up. We're not preserving your role.
Yes, that is not our job.
You're not being altruistic. You just making sure you covering and hedging your bets. And Biko said it best about y'all. Okay.
I mean,
they need to
James,
really separate themselves, their culture from universalism, because that's their problem. Because they try to extrapolate their culture and their way of life to, that's human nature. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
They need to do the work to discern their own culture. That's what they need to do. And they don't want to do the work. They want everybody else to save them, but they're supposed to be the smartest people in the world. You know?
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of their problem. They can't even discern their own culture, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I just did a show on an African radio station a few days ago, The Origins of Racism, and we were talking about this universality. You know, European culture. They don't have to say introduction to European philosophy.
Yes.
They just say introduction to philosophy.
Yes.
I mean, look at it. You make the assumption that what is, quote, European is universal.
Yes.
And then this whole nonsense about, what is, quote, Western civilization as represented, signified by the highest level, the United States, right?
That's true.
Basically, roots to Greece.
Greece, and look at where Greece started.
And it's like, to look, and that's why they didn't like Martin Bennell, who wrote Black Athena.
Black Athena, when he,
when he and that poor guy, he's gone to the spirit world now. But he tried to educate him. They hated him. They threatened his life. Martin Bennell, he had threatening calls. His academic colleagues boycotted him, because he said that Greece, in fact, has African roots. So you're talking about, somebody who did the research, and begins to undo this whole thing about Greece being the pinnacle of white civilization, and then, quote, Western civilization as a, continuous trajectory in that.
Right.
It's all an ideology. It has nothing to, it's lies. It has nothing to do with reality. So that is how racism, white supremacy, there is, when you see racism, and there's a difference between racism and prejudice. Black people can't be racist because we don't have the power to inflict our prejudices. I may talk against a certain group all I want to, or the people of Zimbabwe may say, we don't like the white people exploiting Black people in South Africa. But the Zimbabweans, the Africans, can never be racist because they don't have the power
to colonize the white people, either in Africa or in Europe. That's why you find white people in Africa still living like kings and queens, even today, wherever they find themselves. So that's white supremacy. See, white supremacy. There's a difference between prejudice and racism. White supremacy is the forced universalization of an ideology, which says that what is in, quote, the European world today, quote, Western Europe and North America, as sort of embodiments of Western Europe, has its roots in Greece, in classical ancient Greece, and that this is the pinnacle of human civilization. We have reached the pinnacle, the top, the apex. And that is why we are the supreme peoples of the world. All of the currencies of the world should bow down before the United States dollar, the British pound, and the euro, and so on. See, this is the ideology. And everybody has to stop when it comes to white people. Bow down. And this is how the whole world needs to accept the, the universality of European culture. And by the way, when you look at the history, I was telling you about reading about that book about the Chinese Opium Wars. The Chinese always saw the Europeans, the British, as inferior, called them a savage culture. I mean, they insisted when the British came to China, that they bow down, kowtow they call it, all the way to the ground in front of the Chinese emperors, because they saw the British as savages.
Oh, they weren't that wrong.
As below them. so there was this whole universality of supremacy, white supremacy, and here's the guys bringing opium to China,
right,
and making opium, the world's most prized cash commodity of the 19th century. Now you're going to talk about white supremacy, supreme in civilization, or supreme in barbarism.
Yeah, and also, let's put it into context. You got Herodotus who's saying, yo, man, we got a lot from these Greeks, right? From them ancient Egyptians.
Right.
And we owe them.
Oh, yeah.
And then you got the Greeks who will tell you the Anglo-Saxons are a bunch of Germanic tribes.
Oh, yes.
That's the British.
Yep.
The Greeks themselves said those are barbarians.
Right.
Those are savages.
Yes. They said that to me in Greece when I was there.
Yeah, Greece don't even see themselves connected
to the
with so-called Western civilization.
Right.
They see themselves as a Mediterranean that sprung out of Kemet. And then the Anglo-Saxon Germanic tribes, they the tribes, not us.
Yep.
And then they trying to claim them as their starting point.
Yep. Absolutely. In fact, when you look at all these peoples, down then so-called Southern Europeans, the Italians, you see many of them dark-skinned,
right?
In Greece and all those parts of the Mediterranean, they all had African influences, African Asian influences there. So they understood their histories, but it's this colonizer, this British imperialist Anglo-Saxon, that consolidated everybody else. Then they wanted the biggest part of the globe. That's why they said the sun will never set on the British Empire.
That's right.
There was this whole thing about the world is ours, and then we'll apportion it to the French. We'll give some to the Portuguese. We'll give some to the Belgians. But we are supreme. That arrogance. When I was in Scotland, the Scottish said, don't confuse us with the British. We are not British. We hate the British. The Irish said the same thing. They said, we colonized by Britain. Don't confuse us with being British. So they're dealing with colonialism from the British. And we need to realize that situation, that image of the universality of English, of imperialism, Anglo-Saxon imperialism, is still a problem in this world today. And North America, Canada, the United States, Canada's the land of the Queen,
right?
Right, the sovereign. I mean, they still have the Queen on the Canadian dollar. And I said when I was in Canada, I told them in Okanagan, I said, she doesn't look happy in the picture. All that stealing and looting of gold, she's not happy, people. You should change the face of the Canadian dollar. So, all these things, decolonization.
Yeah.
Decolonization.
And I just want to add to something you said, Julian, about racism and prejudice. And what we got to understand is the basis of society is an economic base. And racism is an ideological underpinning of a society whose economy is based on colonialism and slavery. So that ideology has economic... Yes, it's in the superstructure and it underpins the economic basis of everything. Right. Us saying, man, we don't want these crackers on ourselves. There's no economic basis for that. When they come up with these ideologies called introduction to philosophy and don't appropriately call it introduction to European philosophy, the economic basis has to, that plays a role in the psychosis of the population to justify the enslavement, the settler colonialship of what they did. There's people benefit off that. You have to have an ideology. And what I see we don't have most of all is the ideology. We have, what did Kwame Ture say? We got unity of action, no unity of thought, you know? And once we get the identity thing popping and know who we are, and you know, not people call us by these different names, you know, this whole thing, you go to an Italian, I'm an Italian. I'm an Italian. I'm black. I'm Lil Mochaccino. I'm Prado. I'm from Mississippi. I'm Mississippi. Where your grandmama and them come from?
I don't
know.
Right.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Don't let it rain on that perm now. Don't let it rain. I know you got some of that natanola lighting up your skin. I don't. Boy, you looking like an orange creature.
This is ancestor veneration. D-Up taught me I was the first on the planet. No mere coincidence, this is God's plan. Clark taught me that everywhere the European went in history, they rape and pillage on God's land. Sertima taught me to revisit the image of Egypt, backflip it, call it Kemet like my fourth seed. What Ben taught me, to worship my mother like a goddess, black woman, true stories. Malcolm taught me that the price of my freedom is death. So after I'm free, I'm done. After me, 3 sons left. Martin taught me that boycott more deadly than a bullet. That's a real pocket check. MMG taught me boss. Marcus Messiah Garvey. Different cloth. Even a blind can find him in the whirlwind when they are lost. In the time your mind can find, he was the key that would unlock. D-Up taught me. Clark taught me. Van Sertima, Dr. Ben taught me. Malcolm taught me. Martin taught me. I worship the Prophet Garvey in all his glory. Sheikh taught me. Henrik taught me. Ivan taught me. Joseph Buchanan taught me. Detroit Red taught me. Dr. King taught me. I worship the Prophet Garvey in all his glory. D-Up taught me. Carbon dating would validate my position in nature, as you can all see. Clark taught me, never reject my ancestors. If I do, I'll be rejected by my offspring. Sertima taught me, my ancestors left me specific instructions of who I am and written in stone. Dr. Ben taught me, there's a difference between knowledge and belief. If you can't see, leave it alone. Malcolm taught me, strictly to claim all mine. Be proud, no illegitimate pick-me. Martin taught me, that treason against a black king is overlooked, it's so appalling. Marcus Messiah taught me a blueprint for a black business that we can still admire. Black Star Liner, I do this for us, Marcus, I'm a Black Star rhymer. My veneration is timeless. D-Up taught me, Clark taught me, Van Sertima, Dr. Ben taught me, Malcolm taught me, Martin taught me. I worship the Prophet Garvey in all his glory. Sheikh taught me. Henrik taught me. Ivan taught me. Joseph Buchanan taught me. Detroit Red taught me. Dr. King taught me. I worship the Prophet Garvey in all his glory.
This is where we got to leave it for now, but don't worry. If you want to finish listening to this entire dialogue with Dr. Julian Kunnie, all you have to do is go to our store at shop.conscientization101.com. That is shop.conscientization TIZATION.com. There you will have access not only to this interview, but to all of C101's unabridged interviews, musical commentaries, and merchandise. And most importantly, you will be supporting 100% independent media. This episode has featured sounds from Donnie Mossberg, Tragedy. We've also featured the group Uhuru that includes Cyclonious Tha. The song is African Wisdom from their forthcoming album Uhuru, and Big Frizzle's Ancestor Veneration from his album Family First, Africa for Africans edition. Links to the music are found in the show notes. Don't forget to check us out on Twitter at Conscien1, that's CONSCIEN, and the number 1, on Facebook at Conscientization 101, and Instagram at C101 Editors. And also visit our website at conscientization101.com or C101magazine.com, and make sure you sign up to our mailing list. There you will be able to get all kinds of information. We send a weekly newsletter, so you want to make sure you sign up for that. And we want to thank Julian for taking time and talking with us. And make sure you get his book. I mean, the dialogue is one thing, but you need to read the book as well, because we only touched the tip of the iceberg with this dialogue. So make sure that you go ahead and check out the book. Part 3 is coming up next, so make sure you stay tuned for that. That's the conclusion of this series, so make sure you look out for that one. And before we get out of here, we wanted to play a track from the much anticipated album from Sister Isis Star. Her album is called Cream, Knowledge Rules Everything Around Me, and the track we're going to play is EST 1992. This album is a really good album. We really are happy that she, released it, because every song on it is really, really good. She really you can tell she put her heart into this album. So we wanted to play this song because it embodies a lot of what Julian is talking about. You can get the album now. We have links to the album in the show notes, and it's Name Your Price for a limited time. So make sure you check it out as soon as possible. We'll see you next time.
One finger in the air from you speak the truth, and you hold it in the gold. The beast can't mess with you. Most high guided you through no man's land. Won't fall victim to no man's plan. Be what I wanna be, I know I can. Mighty and firm in my power, that's where I stand. Young African and proud, I shout it out loud. Won't follow no crowd down the road of corruption, self-destruction due to lack of knowledge. We should all study self and know that life's a college. I pay homage to my ancestry, and every African is in my family tree. I refuse to let the truth slip away from me, so I fight for the cause of every breath in me. Yo, check it, way too many got chains on the brain. Many nights turn to day and nothing can't change, still the same. Way too many got chains on the brain. Nights turn to day, nothing can't change, still the same. It's still the same. It's like EST 1992. The ancients passed through just to gather the truth. All the rebels with the cause get a royal salute. Real recognize real when I like how you move. EST 1992. The ancients passed through just to gather the truth. All the rebels with the cause get a royal salute. Real recognize real when I like how you move. Is this a happy life we're living? Love and knowledge that we're bringing. Giving thanks for life and the givings of givings. Most high bless the singers and the players of the instruments. Come to soothe the soul with the daily upliftment. When you're walking on the road, it's like your bad vibes missing. The crazy world you live in no longer seems twisted, and the truth reveals itself like a veil that's been lifted. Then we cite this man-made hell that we live in. Your thoughts or your prayers can't get caught digging. A pit for your lost soul to run, go living. Trapped behind bars of a mental prison. Love to dilly-dally in a ism and schism. No one wants to read and no one wants to listen. I'm on my two-pack, middle finger to the system. Are you ready for this rebel? Are you ready for resistance? It's time to make a change instead of sitting down and wishing. EST 1992. The ancients passed through just to gather gather the truth. All the rebels with the cause get a royal salute. Real recognize real when I like how you move. EST 1992. The ancients passed through just to gather the truth. All the rebels with the cause get a royal salute. Real recognize real when I like how you move. 1992.